Welcome to the Animation Happy Hour,
a podcast where we talk about breaking into the animation industry over a couple of drinks.
All opinions and views expressed in this podcast are solely our own and are not representative of the companies for whom we work.
My name is Ben.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Garrett, and we're all currently animators at Disney. Hey, guys.
Well done. Hello.
Haven't seen you in a while.
Yes, that's right. So today, let's start off with the most important thing.
Yes, very important.
Actually, it's very much of tertiary importance for us. But what are we drinking today? Garrett and Katie, I'll throw it to you guys.
I feel like you should introduce
I know.
it because you made the drink delicious.
Well, today, first of all, I guess we should say the topic, first, which is, Katie, you want to take that? And then I'll transition to the drink.
Oh, sure. So the topic of today is burnout and mental health.
That's right. Oh. So we were workshopping different drinks to have for this.
Yeah.
Animation Sad Hour.
We had a lot of ideas.
Yeah. And then Garrett came up with maybe something blue. It should be, because when you're burnt out, you're tired, you got the blues. And then we came up with the boozy blues.
Boozy Blues.
Little
Boozy blues.
Like a Mai Tai, right?
We almost
right.
did Burnout on the Beach. Didn't quite have the right ring.
Didn't quite do it. Boozy blues, just so fun to say.
When Ben and I are tired, we say, I'm tie-tie. So we almost did my tie-ties, but we realized that's not like a universal thing to say tie-tie. So here we are, Boozy Blues.
But it all came back around because, yes, if you want to make your own Boozy Blues, it is just a Mai Tai. And instead of the orange curacao, you use blue curacao. Which, according to Google, is, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, curacao?
I think so, yeah.
Which, according to Google, is exactly the same thing, except one is orange, one is blue. And typically, the blue is of lesser quality. So it's cheaper, so it's great.
Yay.
Yeah, Boozy Blues.
It tastes
very
really
cost
good.
effective.
Yeah. And it hasn't spilled on our...
Oh, yes.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It has been
Little
preserved and safe.
That's the main pro, is you drink it from a squat glass.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was the problem with the martinis.
But so today, I think we've been meaning to address this topic for a while, and it's come up here and there in previous podcasts, but we wanted to do this one now because actually it makes a lot of sense after our hiatus where we kind of took some time off from the podcast to preserve our mental health. And then recently I actually gave a talk about burnout at work for the animation department. So I had been researching this topic kind of in depth. So I don't want to say it's going to be easy, but but I had already taken tons of notes on it and kind of thought through. And then chat with Garrett. It sounded like Garrett had a lot of ideas also. Ben, I assume, has ideas. He was down for the topic, but but right away we want to give the disclaimer that we are not mental health professionals or experts. So even though we might kind of talk about some scientific or medical lingo, take it with a grain of salt, and then who knows if it's up to date and all of that. But it's just kind of coming from some online research that I did. So I did think it would be helpful to start with giving some quick definitions. Again, very much found on Google. But so I think we all kind of have like a basic understanding of what the word burnout means, but it is helpful, I think, to actually define it and kind of go over the symptoms. So burnout is a chronic syndrome due to exposure to overwhelming long-term stress in the workplace or ineffectiveness and cynicism/detachment. It often feels like a feeling of giving up, like you can't keep going anymore. It is emotional exhaustion that is persistent and impairs your functioning. And some of the signs of burnout or some of the causes or symptoms are that you might feel emotionally drained, physically drained, mentally checked out when you're at work. You might feel too much pressure to succeed, or that you have to kind of hide your personal problems or concerns at work. And actually, you might be feeling financial insecurity. I'm realizing as I get into this that we should probably say this might be kind of a serious episode. I'm sure we'll sprinkle in we'll sprinkle in some light.
Ben can give a joke every
some banter here and there.
Lighten the mood.
Speaking of financial insecurity, have you? Yeah.
I know. Once I started reading, like a feeling of giving up, I was like, oh, I should probably give a disclaimer that it
is a little heavy, but it's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. It is a little heavy, so it's inherently kind of uncomfortable to talk about, but a large, I guess part of the impetus for this one is we wanted to normalize it, right? Because it's
totally.
It's amazing how, I mean, I feel like just people who we know, who we would imagine would be immune to this, or the people most likely to be immune to this, still totally struggle with it. The A+ rock star animators or modelers or riggers or anything. I don't know that I've spoken to a single person
people
that's
in
like
leadership and trainees and like at all levels you could experience this. Yeah.
Totally.
There were some additional definitions I pulled for kind of related, or I guess I basically pulled definitions for conditions that I think come up a lot amongst animators. So the next one I wanted to bring up is languishing. So languishing is something that came up or kind of came into the public consciousness during the pandemic. And that is a feeling or you feel joyless, aimless, empty, and stagnant. It can kind of be the void between depression and flourishing. It's an absence of well-being, and you just feel like you're not functioning at full capacity, but maybe you're still kind of getting through the day and somewhat getting your job done. You feel like your motivation and your focus is dull. And it's often actually a precursor to burnout and can lead to depression and anxiety disorders later. So, I feel like languishing is something that very much, the definition of you have an absence of well-being, you're not functioning at full capacity, but like you're still functioning. And then the next one I pulled was anxiety. So anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. It's also a feeling of fear, dread, or uneasiness, and it might cause you to sweat or feel restless and tense and have a rapid heartbeat. And then lastly, I just pulled the difference between rumination and worry. So rumination is a persistent and repetitive thinking that is usually looking backward and more associated with depression, whereas worry is persistent and repetitive thinking that is usually looking forward and more associated with anxious apprehension. So, so there's some fun definitions for you. But I wanted to start with those to kind of lead into the question, have either of you experienced any of the above? And do you have, kind of any personal anecdotes relating to any of these definitions or anything else that I haven't mentioned?
Well, I can say for sure. I've experienced definitely all of these things. And I'm like weirdly nervous, like talking about this stuff because I feel like this is heavy and But, I can just talk a little bit about my kind of experiences with mental health. I wrote some notes because I want to be prepared. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I feel like this industry has been really tough on my mental health. And pretty much everything you just mentioned, like I've experienced the burnout, the languishing, the ruminating, and I'll get into that in a second. But I am glad we're talking about this, like you said, Ben, because we're like normalizing it. And I think everyone goes through it to some extent. I feel like it's like the number one thing right now, to try to work on. But I think over the past, so I've been struggling with this stuff for a while, but over the past like 3 years, I've really gotten a handle on like my mental health, and I've pursued therapy, and I've actually recently learned that I have OCD, which I don't think you guys knew about me. So a little reveal. I don't even think my family knows I have OCD, but actually to start, I want to say too that like even saying like I have OCD, I feel like the label, I don't think it's like that black and white, because when you learn more about like the disorder, it's not like necessarily like you have this thing or you don't. It's kind of like a pattern of behavior that anyone can kind of experience sometimes.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But I also think OCD is really misunderstood. So I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit because I feel like people think of it as like, you know, someone washing their hands 1,000 times. That's kind of the cliche. But it's basically OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. So you have an obsession that occupies your mind and it causes like anxiety in you. And then you do a compulsion, which is a behavior to alleviate that anxiety somehow. Mm-hmm. So in the case of like washing hands, it's like you have this obsession that like, oh, I'm dirty, I'm contaminated. Mm-hmm. So you wash your hands to feel better. But compulsions can also be mental. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I experience it, is like rumination, you mentioned, Katie. And that's 100% my thing, is rumination. It's checking things. I can kind of give an example of how it's affected my life in like all aspects of my life, but how it affects me with work, I can give an example of that. Again, I haven't even told you guys about this, but it's kind of like interesting, I think. Uh-huh. But I remember on a movie we did, I think it was Strange World. We did shots of the week.
Oh, yeah.
And we would highlight an animator basically every week who had like a really good shot. And it was meant to like inspire the animators to do, you know, show like, oh, you did a good job. We want to, you know, highlight their success. But during these shots of the week, I got a lot of anxiety because I was like, one, like, okay, well, if I don't get picked, that means I'm not a good animator. Or two, I would just be like, well, I'm not as good as that person. So it basically, that was like kind of my obsession, is like, I'm just not as good as that person, or I'm not a good animator in general. So my compulsion would be to avoid looking at either that animator's work or just any animator's work. I'd be like, I don't want to look at other people's work because it makes me feel like I'm not as, it just like causes me to think about that obsession. So I'm going to just avoidance is the compulsion basically. So there was that. And then there was ruminating and checking my old work and making sure it looked like good. And like, I kind of reassured myself that no, I am good, or no, I'm not, just thinking about all that stuff. So is that making sense?
Oh, yeah. And I feel completely similarly, and I feel like I do a very similar thing. So.
I'm actually, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah. Man, I feel so similarly and I felt guilty about not liking Shout of the Week. But like at the end of the day, like I know I'm supposed to like it, and like, yes, I can force myself to like find, you know, I always have to repeat in my head, even though I don't know if I'm not proud of it, but like my favorite mantra, just because I have to use it all the time in my head, is that other people's success does not equal your failure.
Yeah.
100%.
But I really struggle with that to this day, which is not the funnest thing to admit, you know, but
no, it sucks.
I appreciate you sharing that and totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of where I think it is a little bit of a spectrum where like OCD in particular, and I know that's not how necessarily everyone sees it. This is definitely like how I see it. But I think anyone can exhibit patterns of behavior that are similar to like OCD and have those compulsions. But yeah, that's kind of how, it's affected me at work. And I've learned so much about like how to deal with it and how, basically what to do. But it's been a struggle for sure. And I feel like I'm very excited to talk about. I'm very, very passionate about talking about like mental health and stuff. That's why Katie's talk was so great at work. It was really, really awesome. And I was just like, I'm glad we all decided to do this for the episode. But I just talked a lot. I want to hear you guys talk.
Oh, that's great. I can share with, I can bring up some specific examples, I guess, but I want to talk more about a thought pattern that I find myself falling into a lot, which is I'll get into these mental lose-lose situations where... And it's all part of this, like kind of, the burnt. I definitely feel it way worse when I've been working a ton of overtime and not much stuff is going on outside of life and I'm not feeling good about myself. That's when it like really starts to creep up more and more. But I'll find myself in these situations where it's like, if you feel like you're doing well, you can't trust it. And then if you feel like you're doing poorly, you feel 100% like you deserve it and like you're being like exposed for what, you've always been. And I guess another thing is this, with the lose-lose, this situation of like, I know like we need to like be, well, I don't know. I shouldn't speak in generalizations, but I think generally it's good to be challenged at work, I could say. And, and part of being challenged is that you will do some things wrong and, other things right. But I feel like I'm just kind of rambling here, but I have these competing desires to like, on one hand, you want to be around people that are like much better than you, faster, whatever, because you can learn from them. But it's also extremely challenging, and cause you to look like really think down on yourself or whatever. But then if you're in a situation where you feel like you're not being challenged as much, or you feel like you're stacking up decently well compared to, people around you for whatever reason, you feel like you're stagnating. And that's like terrible too. And so it's like you get into this zone where like you can never be happy. And I have definitely felt that before. And I think I've said this, I've talked to Katie about it before, where it's like, it's really hard to find the sweet spot. It's either like, one way or the other, or even like as simple as like requesting shots. If you request like simple things and you get them and you're like, I'm not really like pushing it. Like, yeah, of course they gave these to me because they would give more challenging ones to other people or whatever. And then on the flip side, if I like request challenging shots or whatever and get them, they're like, oh, this is just, so-and-so would do this better or whatever. Or like, so I'll notice I feel like particularly when I'm feeling drained and stuff at work, I find myself sinking into those patterns of thought more, where I'm like, and even like as an outside observer to my own brain, I'm like, Ben, well, there's no scenario that's good here. Like you can't, you're like
conditioning yourself, or we're conditioning ourselves to always be dissatisfied. Like there's never, we need to like practice to like be content sometimes. I totally relate to what you're saying.
For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. They're looking at me now, so I guess.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Cool. Yeah. I'll speak to like specific times in my life that I've felt burnout, which apologies, these guys heard me talk about it when I gave the talk, but I'll share it for the listeners. So, and the two times I think I've been the most burnout were very much tied to like trying to make it in the industry and like being a part of the perpetual temp cycle and feeling a lot of insecurity. So the first time, which I've already talked about on the podcast a bit, was when I interned at Leica. So that was when we were in grad school. We had 1 year left of grad school, but I very much like wanted to do a good job and get an offer and get invited back. But there were 3 interns, and it was really clear that I was the weakest intern, and I super struggled while I was there. And I kind of knew I was the weakest intern because the other 2 were getting shots and special tests to test certain characters or rigs out. And just every review, like I got tons of critique, and the other interns were very strong. And it was kind of like a very stark contrast when we were being reviewed. And I had a really tough time. And then just kind of knowing that we were going to be juggling student loan debt and being freaked out about that industry in general, because it was very nomadic and a lot of the animators there had like short-term contracts. So I was kind of questioning like everything and feeling like I had no chance there. And I just remember like counting the minutes, like counting the hours, counting the days until the internship ended, and just like really, really struggling. And so after that, I like took a quarter off from school because I was so exhausted and kind of probably depressed. And I probably should have seen a therapist then, but I was still in a state of my life where I was like, I don't need a therapist. And So that was the first time. And then the second time was at Disney after Encanto. And I probably had been writing some previous Burnout because we had on our slate just had a bunch of shows that went like right up against each other with like zero downtime. And when you're a newer artist or newer animator, very often you are cast to things quickly because they know that new people want to prove themselves. So, and some of this is where I need to be careful with my words because I don't want to say, they'll like take advantage of you, but it's just kind of known that like, younger, newer folks like are good to cast to those projects, back to back. So I was cast to a lot of things and had very little downtime, and a lot of the projects were very difficult. So by the time I got to Encanto, I was already pretty exhausted. And then it became very clear at the studio that was going to be a make it or break it project for getting extended at the studio or getting staff.
So stressful.
It was extremely stressful. It became clear to probably like, I don't know, like 24 of us or so that we were it was kind of like a big test for us. So you just felt like everything you did was being watched. Everything you did was being compared or analyzed, whether it was self-imposed or not. And this was during the pandemic, so we were all very isolated. And I feel like when I had all of the interactions over Zoom, I like hyper analyzed everything. And it was super awkward just naturally because Zoom is awkward. So, and that show, I'm trying to remember, it was a very difficult show where we all did tons of overtime. So I think we like all
these factors just
everything kind of compounded. And I think we did, I don't know, was it like April to August? We had like no weekends or something. Anyway, so I was like really exhausted by the end of that show and very much stressed about like losing my job. And like Garrett was saying, like, I feel like I had some unhealthy behaviors. Like I would like look up other animators casting on their shotguns and like see like, oh, why did they get that shot? Does that mean they're like better and they're like favored? And like, I'm not proud of that at all. Or I would like feel like relieved when another temp got a bunch of notes and dailies, and it's like a terrible thing to feel that way. So I realized that like, those behaviors were ugly. And then just little things like I would get like snappy with like Ben or like my sister. My sister's like the biggest Disney parks fan like in the world. She loves going to Disney parks. And I took her to Disneyland like Labor Day weekend after Encanto ended. And I remember just like saying like snarky things about how like Disney was gonna like let me go and stuff. And I'm like not proud of that. So I could tell like I was kind of hitting my my wall, I guess, and realized I needed to work with somebody. So I did start seeing a therapist. And she really helps me kind of recognize, my patterns and my thought patterns and negative self-talk patterns, and help me work on realizing like if you actually think through the worst case scenario of if you get laid off or if you don't get extended, what happens? Like how would you do? Like what would be the next steps? And realizing like, okay, maybe I'll be a little embarrassed, but like nobody's actually died of embarrassment. And like so many amazing people have been laid off and brought back, and like just kind of start thinking through all of your safety nets. And so that was really helpful. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I know we're going to talk about treatments and solutions and things later and things that help. But anyway, that was a long ramble. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
It's so relatable. I feel like the common thing I feel like I'm hearing with all of us is the comparison to other artists is a very big.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
That's like, that's got to be a big thing that everyone does.
That it is so tough and tricky because we've kind of talked about this before here and there, but to a certain degree, you have to be able to do that objectively, but there's a difference between doing it objectively and emotionally. Yes. Or, like with anything, moderation is the key. You don't want too much of anything, and comparison is absolutely one of those things. Like we've talked about before with, just getting into the industry, you kind of have to be able to objectively assess your skills versus others, but it can just so easily go haywire.
Yeah, become toxic quickly.
Yeah, totally.
Just get in your head and just like...
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I feel like this is good that everyone's talking about this stuff because I think a lot of us experience this in the industry probably like solo. So
yeah, for sure.
I think it's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm like revisiting the definitions and like I totally ruminate over dailies after I have it. I'm like revisit everything that was said or if you have like a performance review at the end of the year, I definitely ruminate over that a lot. And then I also like worry a ton about future reviews and presenting but I think we'll get into how do you deal with it later, but absolutely feel these things.
But first we wanted to, you guys remind me, part of the reason, or we just wanted to talk through maybe some of the most common things that might kind of send you down this slippery slope of the burnout and depression and everything. So we're going to mention a number of things here and then kind of laser focus in on a couple, but we just made a quick list of things that we see as being particularly ubiquitous in the film animation industry. So what do you guys think we should do? Maybe I'll run through the list real quick and then we can hammer in on a couple more specifically. Is that okay? So, all right, I'm just going to read through, say 1, never taking vacation. These are in no particular order, by the way. Never taking vacations. Ghosting, which is defined as like working without being paid. It could be like working all-nighters or going in super late or going in super early / leaving super late without being paid.
And I don't know if you might have mentioned this, but these are all things that I feel like are kind of normalized. Did you mention that?
No, I didn't use those exact words, but I like where you're going. Go for it.
Just like I feel like these are all things that sort of seem like okay to do. Like, or there's certain people, or I don't know, societally, I feel like they're normalized. So I feel like they're important to mention because it's like, you might think this is like, okay, like pulling an all-nighter, that's fine. It's like, no, dude, that's not healthy to work all night and not sleep. So,
you might have like some uncle or somebody that's like, you should be the first one in and the last one to leave, or like that kind of like.
It's like, well, maybe, but also maybe not at all.
Yeah,
like
it's very present in our culture.
Yeah. So yes, thank you for that. Just the specificity there of that wording. These are things that we see as being normalized and in some very toxic cases, even celebrated, which is not okay. Never taking vacations, ghosting, not going outside or taking breaks because you're, quote, like focused, not eating or taking basic, bodily function breaks because you're, quote unquote, in the zone. Unhealthy comparisons to other artists and constantly ruminating after showing your shot in dailies. And I'll expand that to say like after any interaction really with like peers or higher ups or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all stuff.
Yeah. By no means an exhaustive list. Those are just like kind of the big things that came up immediately for us that we feel like we deal with on a daily basis or see on a daily basis. So, does anybody care to do a deep dive into one of those or anything.
I feel like we talked about the comparisons to other artists thing and how we all kind of like have done that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I don't know if you guys have any specific stories or something. I feel like all these are, important.
Yeah. Especially, or we can keep chatting about comparisons a little more. I think it's like, I see it as, or the type of comparison I do the most is to like a peer group. So since I was in a internship group and I was in a trainee class, like I very much found myself most often comparing myself to that group. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know, and I see it at all levels too. I even hear supervisors comparing themselves to other supervisors, and like, I think we just all kind of naturally like look around or maybe it's somebody that had the same number of years of experience as you, or you kind of latch on to, or I kind of latch on to comparing myself to specific people, and it's like not healthy at all.
Totally.
Because you don't know the whole picture. Like you don't truly know what level of experience somebody is. You don't know if they're getting outside coaching or how much time they're putting in. They could be ghosting. Like you have no idea.
It's also like, okay. Like this is something I've had to grapple with, is it's okay to not be the best at something. Yes, and honestly, none of us are the best at something, right? Mm-hmm. We all have someone who's better than us, but it's it's like, I am the best. But it's like, okay, it's fine. Like a studio needs like multiple people. Like you don't have to, everyone doesn't have to be like Glenn Keane. And even Glenn Keane would argue, he's not, I'm sure he'd be humble and be like, I'm not the best animator. And then Miyazaki would be like, I'm not the, like it never ends. And it's fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
And especially with art, like where it's subjective and people have different strengths. It's almost silly to be like, am I better than this person?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely like apples to oranges sometimes. Like some people are faster. Some people might have a better, I don't know, appeal, but they might be slower or whatever it is. And it seems like Ben's about to say something.
Oh, really? Wow. Good. Reading nonverbal cues. I thought I had a good poker face on. Yeah, I think, gosh, this is all really valuable. Or to what it's conceited for me to say in our own podcast. God, this is good stuff. Thank you. But yeah, I think it's natural to talking about like, how you tend to compare with peer groups. I think there's like this thing that happens in the brain where you're like, oh, this person is, seems beyond or better than me at XYZ. So I think your brain automatically starts to look for reasons or excuses for like, oh, well, they're 4 years older than me. Oh, they have 2 more years experience, or like, oh, XYZ. And sometimes, like to Garrett's point, it's just like, well, that person's really good. And like, I'll keep trying to get good. And, people's progress is all over the place. It's not a linear, thing. So maybe someday you'll be better at that. Maybe someday you won't. And that's not the end of the world. I think it's generally good to try to keep progressing and getting better. But what that means can be totally variable on anything. I mean, maybe getting better is you don't want to get better necessarily at your job. It's something outside of that or whatever. Like, and that's all valid too. And so yeah, it's a really tough pill to swallow that you don't always have to be like the best at whatever. But I think it's a good one. And ironically, I think if you get over that and you're more chill about it then and like willing to like chat with people you admire, whatever. I feel like there's this inverse thing that happens where like, honestly, if you feel more comfortable and there's less pressure, you can end up doing better work anyway. So it's tricky.
But I feel like when I was hearing you talk, we're going to talk about this a little later, but it's tricky when you think your identity is your ability. Like you're like, me being a good animator is like my value as a human being. And I don't know, I feel like we sometimes fall into that trap of thinking that.
Totally.
And it's just, that's a very unhealthy way to look at life. But
yeah. It's especially tough because sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's really tough because there are ways in like when you are specifically an animator and you're like in dailies where you're showing your shot in front of 100 people and whatever, there are objective days where you're like, I did the worst today. Like that person got their shot approved. This person, they loved it, just had 2 notes. My shot got totally like blown up and what I did was totally wrong. So it's really tough when that's your whole identity to be like, well, my identity today is I am the worst, like, so yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah. I'll speak to that. Since a lot of our listeners are students too, and like trying to get their first gig, I think that's extra hard when you get your dream internship or something and you go from being like the best at your school to then you're the worst at the studio. And it's like a mind fuck for lack of better words. I don't know. We're gonna get like the X rating.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it's definitely like a trip for your ego to kind of go through that, and then I think what we're getting at is the way you start to deal with that is like reminding yourself that everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. You bring your own unique perspective that nobody else can bring to that shot. And the life of a shot is long and complicated. And so you just kind of have to keep reminding yourself of those things. But it can be, I think, especially hard when you're just starting out.
Yeah.
You know that real estate concept that's like, don't have the best house on the block. Have like medium or worst house. I've actually forgot how it.
Have like the worst house in the best area.
Yeah, have the worst house in the best area. Kind of applies to artists too, because it's like it's actually not good if you're like the best. Well, I shouldn't say good or bad, but potentially it could be not great if you're like the best artist in the studio, because then you don't have much to learn from.
Right.
So in some ways it's good to remind ourselves too that like, okay, there's people better than me.
Totally.
Too. Like that's great. Yeah. I can learn from them. I can chat with them. So that's something I try to remind myself too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also to your previous point, where you talked about how subjective everything is that we do, I think things aren't concrete too. You can have like the A+ rock star animator, and then just on a certain project with a certain director, for whatever reason, they just don't gel and it doesn't work out, and vice versa. You can have someone who's more, middle of the pack or lower, and they just have the right thing. And I'm specifically thinking of, I wish I had looked this up. I believe the supervisor for Timon on Lion King was, I forget his name. Maybe we can add it to the show notes or something. But I heard this story in the past that, definitely an incredible animator, but I don't think the person was like an Andreas Deja, who like consistently was always like a supervisor, or Glenn Keane or whatever. But who doesn't love Timon? Timon is like one of the iconic Disney characters. I think it was just like right place at the right time. Everything gelled. That project just spoke to them. That character spoke to them. So yeah, even if you are in a situation where you feel like, oh man, I'm really not one of the heavy hitters or whatever, I'm not saying that this animator wasn't, but I'm just saying you never know when the next thing around the corner, just something might gel, so just, keep at it and don't beat yourself up, because circumstances are a large ingredient in the equation, I would say, or a large factor in the equation.
I love that. Yeah, we like simplify things so much, and you learn that in therapy too, with like cognitive distortions and stuff. We like to like label things and kind of like, this is good. This animator is just objectively good, better. And it's just, like you said, not how it actually works in reality.
For sure.
Well, should we talk about some practical things you can do to improve your mental health? Unless we wanted to keep going on some other stuff in the normalization of unhealthy practices.
We'll see.
I think we're ready. Yeah,
we're good.
So, it's fine.
That's perfect.
Cool.
We'll move on to the proactive side of this podcast.
Yeah, how do you deal with all these issues, Ben?
Yeah. Well, we'll start with the big one that we've mentioned already a couple times is therapy. And we will try to, again, with normalizing burnout and stuff, I think it's great to also normalize therapy. I have not openly said it yet on this podcast, but I have also been / am in therapy as well. So
nice.
So it's not just these two people next to me. It's me too.
I have something to say about that too. I want to like talk a little bit about just how difficult it is to even just get a therapist. Like I was thinking about this the other day and I'm like, we're living in Los Angeles, big city. We have insurance for therapists, right? Like, but at least from my experience, I don't know about you guys, but just finding a therapist in your insurance is difficult. Like, because even if you know, there's like Psychology Today, which is a resource where you can, you know, find therapists and filter it by insurance. But even that process is difficult because sometimes those therapists, it says they take your insurance, but then you call them and they don't.
Right.
And even like therapy is such an intimate process that like, if you just go to your insurance website and like look at the therapists on your directory, they don't have any information. Sometimes it's just like a name.
Yeah.
So I just want to like talk a little bit about like, first of all, therapy is important, but I'm a little frustrated that it's very difficult to find therapists, even if you have insurance and even if you're in like one of the biggest cities in the country, it's like...
And they might not be taking patients.
They might not be taking patients. You don't know anything about them. So I just want to bring that up. I mean, that's not to say don't do it. I'm just like a little frustrated by...
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And that's even if you have everything working for you. So it's like, I can't imagine if you don't have insurance and you're living in a place where it's like a smaller city, you have like one option, maybe. I feel for you. That sucks.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you hear that advice of like, oh, just like get a therapist. And it's like, it's hard to get a therapist.
Sometimes you have to try out a few and find the right fit. And I mean, I guess I could speak to like finding a therapist and what my therapy was like, because many people don't even really know how it works. So I actually found a therapist through a fellow animator. We have like a women's channel, a Slack channel at Disney. So I remember just like reaching out on that channel and saying like, hey, does anybody have a good therapist? And luckily the one I got referred to, I liked right away. And that was great because I like kind of knew she already was familiar with the animation and entertainment industry. So I felt like I didn't have to do so much explaining about my job. And she was already very familiar with, I think animators are very similar. So I think she was pretty familiar with what I was coming in with. I did pay out of pocket actually. Which made it easier, and it was not cheap. I think it was $150 a session, and I'm very privileged that we just like did that because I think I was in like a very low point, so I was just like I need to talk to somebody, and they were coming highly recommended, so I just went with it. And for me, it started out.
Sorry, terrible timing. I'm taking off my hoodie. You might hear rustling.
Take it off.
I know, this is the striptease portion. Surprise.
Hot and heavy.
But,
Easy blues.
So back to therapy. But yeah, so just in case people are curious, I started off weekly. And I liked the therapist right away because she was like, it's not my intention to keep you as a patient forever. Like, I want to help you find the tools so that you can handle stuff in the future and maybe not need me. And, you know, maybe life will change and you'll come back to me. But like, my intention is to help you become like self-sufficient and stronger, which I really liked because I was sort of like skeptical going in, and I was like, I didn't know much about therapy. So yeah, I started weekly with like 1 hour sessions. Eventually after a few months went to bi-weekly and then monthly and then phased out, I think after like 9 months or so. I'm trying to remember. But yeah, so that was my experience. And I think you found your therapist through an animator friend, right? And he or she is in network, or
my therapist is in network. So yeah, it's much more affordable. It's like, well, not the yours was not affordable, but
it's very expensive.
It's a good thing to bring up is that the price is incredibly variable on whether you have insurance or not, or whether in network or out of network. In Katie's case, it was absolutely worth the investment just to go with this person that was highly recommended. And you always say like, a couple places not to skimp on money is your health, and and your mental health is absolutely paramount. Should be emphasized just as much as physical health, if not more, frankly. My therapist is in network, and gosh, there was something I wanted to say. I'm trying to remember now. Oh, just with Garrett, I'm glad you brought up that initial point, because I think a lot of people, it is still kind of taboo to like talk about it / admit in quotation marks, even though I don't like using that verb for it, that you're interested in therapy. And I think a lot of people's first experience is that they Google it and then see that it's a little more complicated than they thought.
Yeah.
And then they wait another 3 years.
They want to find the perfect.
Yeah. Or they're just like, I'm not that bad, so it's not worth, the effort, but it is totally worth the effort. I feel like it's the same as like, even if you're not, horribly out of shape, it's still worth it to exercise. Same thing. If you're not like on the edge, it's fine. It's still worth it to talk to a therapist. I feel like it is very much just like, treat it like physical health with where be preventive, or just, go into good, try to normalize like good mental habits and stuff, even if you feel like you're generally okay. And I will say one of the first questions from a therapist, or at least in my experience, so you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the first things they do is say like, okay, what can I do for you? Or like, what brings you to therapy? And for me, that's a very intimidating question, because I'm like, like, I don't know exactly what I need or whatever. So if you're finding yourself intimidated by that, or not knowing exactly what you would say to a therapist, I think what I like doing is just being like, well, here's what's on my mind, and it's occupying a lot of my time and mind, that I'm like thinking about this or struggling with this, and I would like to be able to like handle it better, or whatever spin on that is specific to you. There's no wrong answer to that question for like, what can I do to you? I don't know. I feel this disproportionate pressure. I feel like to be like, well, I'm showing signs of this with a little bit of this, and like
exactly
to be able to like diagnose yourself as a therapist, even though we're not therapists. So
I feel like I totally agree with that. And I think what Katie said earlier about like trying out different therapists is so important too. But even though it's a pain in the ass, because you have to like set up an appointment with like a bunch of different people.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to add on to what you guys were saying from like an OCD perspective, and something I didn't know, was that there are so many different types of therapists too. There's like talk therapy. There are like, what I learned kind of not the hard way, but sort of, is that talk therapy, or like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, is not actually great for someone with OCD, because OCD, the problem is you're overthinking. You're like, you're doing too much of the like ruminating. So that can, like, if you go to a CBT therapist and try to like kind of like learn how your thoughts might be wrong, it's almost like adding fuel to the fire.
Gotcha.
So that's another thing I just wanted to throw out in terms of like difficulty with therapy, is like sometimes finding the right type of therapist. And you don't know, if when you're just like stressed out, you don't know what type of therapy you're in. So I guess I wanted to add that and just say it can be a messy process. It can be a not satisfying process too, when you like go and you're like, I don't feel better, but it's like, it's work to just, that you have to continue to do. And it's so important. I agree with what Ben said totally about the like mental health and physical health being like, you should treat it very important.
It takes time. It's a practice. Like, I remember feeling like, okay, like just teach me all the things, like, let's go, like, and I could tell, like, my therapist wanted me to focus on one thing every session, and I would be like, okay, let's go over this,
and like,
fix me. But like, actually, for me, I think it was CBT, and like actually talking through everything and verbalizing things out loud was the most important part to start realizing kind of like how mean I am to myself, and like just things like that. So it had to be kind of drawn out week by week, and she did give me various homework assignments and kind of to think through and work through. And so it really did take time, even though I impatiently wanted to be fixed right away. But yeah. And I think it's kind of like the scientific basis for that would be it takes time to rewire a lifetime of wiring in your brain. So you can't just like flip a switch sometimes. I don't think we'll get into the topic of medication here because we're like not really authorities on it, but because I'm totally open-minded towards medication. I didn't end up needing it, but you know, that could be something that you need to add to your roster too. But yeah. Okay, so we just took a little break. So if there's like a sudden change in tone, that's why.
It might be.
And we maybe refilled our drinks and like got really giggly about random things. But anyway.
This is the fun part of
it. But
well, we're talking about
very serious topics. And I did think of something I wanted to add to the therapy point before we kind of move on to other solutions and treatments. But so I was thinking it might be helpful to talk about a few like of the biggest takeaways that we learned in therapy like so far. And for me, one of the biggest things was to kind of revisit my relationship with control and kind of learn that a lot of my anxiety comes from trying to control outcomes and predict outcomes, and therapy taught me to kind of release that and let go of that and recognize that like I really can't predict the future and nobody has a crystal ball. So a lot of like having anxious thoughts about the future and trying to picture every possible outcome and or like work super hard and tons of hours is me like trying to force the future to do something. And yeah, just realizing like, okay, I really don't have that. There's that like, I don't know where it comes from. There's that motto or maxim that's like, give me the strength to, what is it?
It's like a prayer, right?
Yeah. Oh, the serenity prayer, I think.
Grant me the serenity to, I'm going to totally misquote it, but it's like, something about accepting the things I cannot change, the like courage or strength to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not 100% it, but it's in that zone.
Yeah. And that I think was like a huge lesson of therapy is like recognizing when I don't have control over something. And
sure.
And like a anecdote about this is I, in the spring after Encanto, so I guess this is 2022? No, I'm trying to remember the year. Whenever we were working on Strange World, I was in a pitch program at Disney. So I was like pitching an idea for a series, and I was a finalist, and it was really exciting. And I was working with like development and had really exciting mentors and like directors and that kind of thing. And I had, of course, like at the same time was building up tons of anxiety and like tons of achievement pressure, stress. And of course, like wanted it to all work out. But my therapist like right away recognized like, you know, like you can work really hard on this and you can like increase the probability, but you should recognize that you don't actually like have control over the outcome, because then if you think you can control the outcome, if it doesn't work out the way you want, you're going to take it really hard. And there could be a million reasons why it doesn't work out. Like maybe the company already has a similar pitch, or someone else's idea is just better, or maybe the funding drops, or whatever it is. Like there's so many things that could be out of your individual control that you need to be prepared if it doesn't work out. And in my case, it didn't work out. Like they didn't pick me as a finalist. And of course I still took it hard, but therapy helped me take it less hard, because I did kind of recognize, like that's part of the business, is tons of people pitch things and you can't say yes to every pitch. And so that's one specific example of how therapy really helped.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
I feel like along the lines of like how therapy has helped us, I think for me, with therapy was learning about cognitive distortions and things like, basically it's like thought assumptions we make in our heads. And some of those are like, I think I wrote some down here. It's like, oh crap, where did I put them? Like mind reading, like making assumptions about, what other people are thinking about you, or catastrophizing, thinking like, this one little thing means so much more than it actually means. So I guess I would encourage anyone to just like look up on Google, like cognitive distortions, and kind of, there's some books that we mentioned later that also talk about this stuff, but that was really insightful for me, because I'm like, literally every single thing in here is like something I do, and I feel like a lot of us do. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. Thanks. Wait, I want to talk about mind reading for a second, because
please. Yeah.
I am definitely prone to that, but I think with practice, you start to recognize when you're doing it and how you're probably wrong. Because especially for us, like I feel like we read the faces of our team or the director or whoever while they're reacting to our work. And maybe sometimes they have a flat face, or they're frowning, or they look confused, or maybe they're not even like watching the shot, or especially like when we were on Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
People had all kinds of faces, and you're like, your inclination is to think, oh my God, they hate it. Like they don't like it, blah, blah, blah. But like a million things could be happening. They could be thinking about the last meeting they were in. They could be thinking about picking their kid up from school, and like, how are they going to leave the office, or what time? I don't know. You have
like
no
a different
idea.
department. Like, they're looking at your shop, but they're not really looking at your animation. I've seen that a bunch where they end up like staring for a while, and you're like, they don't like it, but they give you a note that's not for you. It's like, the art here is wrong, or something, or the layout is weird, and you're like, oh, that's not me. So yeah,
totally.
I totally agree.
Basically, like, you have no idea what people are thinking ever.
Yeah, don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
I have kind of back to, I liked something you said before, where you said like with the pitch program, like it still hurt and you're still disappointed, but it wasn't like devastating, like all encompassing after therapy. And I think that's a really good nuance where like being balanced and having, I guess, quote unquote, thick skin to me doesn't mean you don't feel anything. It just means it doesn't destroy you. Because like on one hand, I would say, oh, it's actually quite a positive that you were really disappointed, because it's a sign that you really cared about what you were doing, and that's really valuable for your job, and you were really into it and passionate about it, and it didn't work out, which happens, but it's a sign that you were, for the past, 6 months to a year, you were involved with this thing you were really passionate about. Didn't quite go the right way. You can recover from that, but overall, you can frame that as like a positive, where like, oh, great, you're really like feeling things. You're really invested in your job, versus, of course, you need to be able to, put brakes on that when necessary, but versus, I think on the other extreme, you could make a case for like where we're not saying you should go through life in this like malaise of like not feeling anything. Like inherently, when you're passionate about something, you'll be really disappointed when it goes a different way. But just if you can take a step back and be like, okay, why am I feeling this? And not let it become all encompassing. And again, being grateful that you're involved with something that is really speaking to you for whatever reason. Sometimes, selfishly for myself, sometimes that's what I tell myself when I'm like, oh God, I'm really upset that idea wasn't picked by the director. But ultimately, it's nice. I feel privileged that I'm in a job where I'm presenting ideas, that I feel passionately about, and some will go over and some won't. But maybe this just means a different one will be good. So yeah, I don't know. It's just a little nuance that I think is
It's like reframing.
Totally a reframing.
Yeah, I feel like it's like the triggers don't go away and your like gut reactions don't stop, but you just kind of feel better equipped to react and handle them and not fall into patterns of rumination and obsession.
Totally.
And move on a little bit faster than you used to, or at least in my case. But I love that. It's like you shouldn't panic like if you do have a negative reaction to something, but just kind of look at, okay, how quickly do you move on, or how much does it impact you later? And
which again, sorry, I know we're kind of belaboring therapy and stuff for a while. We can move on after this, but I think a huge part of it that's helpful for me is just normalizing things. Like Katie said, like when you feel a certain way, not being like, sometimes there's this compounding effect where maybe, Garrett, this even relates to your talk therapy, where it's like, oh, I'm feeling a certain way, and now I'm going to hyperanalyze how I'm feeling about that way, and now blah, blah, blah. And it like increases exponentially.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas I kind of like, taking everything and being like, okay, probably whatever you're feeling is some sort of normal. It's just, 100%. It's a little out of whack with like, you're feeling it a little too much, or it's affecting your behavior in a certain way that you need to kind of like put the brakes on or, corral. But most, like 99% of the feelings we feel, and not all of them, are totally normal, acceptable, like, understandable feelings. And it's just kind of like that you just need to kind of tweak the dials on the dosages and like what exactly they make you like say to yourself or do or whatever. So for me, that's been super helpful just to,
I feel like I never agreed harder with something. Like I totally agree. And I actually think with like OCD and learning about the disorder and stuff, so many problems come from trying to control, like Katie was talking about, control your feelings and emotions, and normalizing it being like, oh, it's okay to feel this certain way. That's like a huge part of like sort of recovery, being like, it's normal to feel these things. When you start to judge, oh, I'm feeling this way, that means X and Y and Z. Like that's when you start getting into trouble. And then you start, I mean, at least for me, like, because I'm feeling this way, that means I am actually this or whatever, like making all those kind of associations.
Totally.
One of my favorite like mental health books is You Are Not a Rock, which is like kind of a weird title,
no.
But it's talking about how like we're humans with a lot of complex feelings and brains. We're not rocks that don't feel. Like we have feelings. That's like the whole point of the title. Yes, I feel that, Ben.
I'll have to check that out. You're Not a Rock?
Yeah.
Cool.
We should have maybe in our show notes, we'll have like a list of... Because I know you have a great...
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, definitely. We can share some.
Yeah.
To round out the therapy point, the last thing I'll say is just, I think it was really good for our relationship, Ben and me, just because before it was like me or either of us like dumping on the other person.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a really hard thing when you're not like professionally trained to help somebody who's burnout or depressed, or very anxious. And I think it helped our relationship just to lighten that burden and
Totally.
That was like one of my therapists said, like, I would be like, oh yeah, Isabel's my therapist. And he was like, dude, no, that's not a good way to like do things. Like that's not a healthy way to like interact with your partner. So totally.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. In a weird way, sorry, I keep talking about it. I just keep extending it. But in a weird way, it's almost, I've kind of tweaked it in my brain to be this kind of fun thing where a therapist is like, pay attention to like what triggers a response and then kind of study that response where it's like, whoa, I feel like really jealous of this person right now, or I feel really insecure about this. And then take a step back and be like, hey, why am I feeling that way? Because like, I'm not super jealous of, I don't know, this other person who's doing really well or whatever. So like to kind of like approach it almost scientifically, I guess is kind of, has been kind of reassuring to me and being like, okay, well, you probably don't really just want to be that person. It's just some aspect of the situation is causing you to feel jealous or envious or whatever. Study that. And I don't know, for me, that's been a help to kind of, take a step back.
You're like approaching it with like curiosity and just being like, what?
Yes, totally. Instead of judgment, like you said.
Yeah, like as you go through the week, you notice some things that you feel and you kind of like keep a mental list to then talk about with your therapist.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Oh, could you help me with this thing that happened? And yeah, totally.
Nice. So overall, therapy, good.
We love therapy.
Yay.
We are very pro therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy on the fence at the end.
Yeah, it's a little controversial. Oh man, there's a lot of stuff here. So was that the first one we talked about?
Yeah.
Yes. So that was a big one. So maybe we can speed through the others a little more, or however you guys feel. But we'll say the next one is exercise.
We skipped the top one.
Oh,
we did skip it.
Okay.
It's something I worked on with my therapist.
Okay, never mind.
I think it's important. Honestly, all these
to be continued.
Forget about exercise.
You don't need to exercise.
That's tertiary.
Something I worked on a lot with my therapist was developing a sense of self-worth that was separate from my job and like separate from my identity as like a quote unquote Disney animator. I think it's basically like, it is what it's defined as. I'm having trouble transitioning out of, but yeah,
Totally.
Whether it's, so every human being has worth, regardless of your achievements, regardless of, your role in society. Like every human being is worthy of love and respect. And like, you don't have to get straight A's, accomplish anything, have a fancy job, have a fancy life, whatever. Like everyone's worthy of love and respect. So that's a baseline. But just in general, like I find it so helpful to have something on the outside of work to look forward to feel good about, to kind of explore just for myself. So I brought the pitch program after I got rejected, or like my idea got rejected from the pitch program. I kind of redirected that energy into running. And I was like, well, it's always been on my bucket list to run a marathon. I'm going to do something that's like just for me that, has nothing to do with my job. And I just like really want this thing to kind of chip away at. And I like hesitate to mention that because it is also like a very achievement based thing.
Sure.
But for me, it became like just like a meditative practice almost. And it felt really good to exercise my body. We were going to get into exercise a little bit. It felt like the antidote to like animating for 9 to 12 hours a day for me on a screen and like getting outside. So that was like a new sense of like self-worth for me.
It's kind of, certainly kind of results based, sure, with saying like you want to run a marathon, but I would venture to say you very legitimately enjoyed the process, right? Like in a different way. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to do this thing just to cross off run a marathon. If that doesn't happen, I'm effed. Like,
it was very much like for me, actually, it was like so emotional to like chip away at that goal. And like first I, like did like a 10K and then a half and then a full. And for me, it was sort of this like proving to myself that I can do new things or learn new things kind of thing.
Totally.
And like I haven't peaked kind of thing. It's hard to explain, but I don't know, when you're like a mid-30s lady, maybe you'll understand. But it's like
can't wait until I'm mid-30s.
I don't know. It's just sort of,
Yeah. No, I totally get
life
it.
isn't over. You can still do new things. Yeah.
I think that's great. I think like, and when I look at that point that we have sense of self-worth separate from job, I'm like, well, how does one achieve that? And I feel like it is time spent doing other things outside of job. Yeah. So for you, it's like, practicing running the marathon or just doing some sort of hobby or doing whatever. Like if you spend 100% of your time on your job, you are going to be devastated if something bad happens at your job that's outside of your control. You're not going to have anything to fall back on. You're not going to have a community to support you or like whatever. Or if you like your relationships have fallen off the wayside because you're focusing on. So I think even Guillermo mentioned that, didn't we? In the Reels episode. It's like I always think about that. Like our identity kind of not being tied to our work. Whatever ways you can achieve that it's so important. Totally.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah. When I started that running goal, I joined like a running training group, and it was so nice to like show up to practice, and everyone there, like, they never asked about my job, or like maybe we talked about like a little bit.
They were really selfish.
No, but it wasn't. It was like, oh, what do you do? Not like, how was dailies, so like, I just knew it was this kind of safe space to like be a different person.
Yeah, super refreshing.
Just like you have this alter ego, and they know me as like running group Katie and
RGK.
And it's just a different community.
RGK. Ben is the king of acronyms.
Yeah. But I mean, there's also, like you don't have to run a marathon, but you can take joy in just like being a good friend, being a good wife or spouse, or being a good cat or dog mom. Yeah, exactly. Like
video game player. There's so many things.
Whatever it is. Yeah. Just like having something else to, as you said, fall back on, because, sometimes life is hard and maybe there's a layoff, or maybe work gets really tough, or,
Yeah, I would say this is like almost like the therapy thing. I would say, like, even if you feel like you don't need this right now, just invest in it. It's literally like investing money, where it's like, even if the stock is doing really well right now, just hedge your bets, invest in a couple, diversify. Say, even if you feel like your job is giving you everything right now, just branch out a little bit, just in case, because there might be some rainy days. You'll be happy when you get to be running group Katie as opposed to animator Katie for a day, or
And I feel like we're like definitely directing this as at like younger people, because when you're in school, you're like 110% into animation, and it's like your life and identity.
And I get it too, because you probably feel pressured to be that way, because you're like, well, I have to get really good so I can get hired in these limited jobs.
And up until that point, that kind of is your defining character. Like, I took a lot of pride in like, oh, I'm different. I'm kind of into like the art stuff, animator stuff. So, definitely feel free to bathe in that, I guess, of being that. But don't pigeonhole yourself into only that. Like, Katie and Garrett said, that's a lot more out there.
Yeah, that could be hard to reconcile with like when you're applying to jobs or internships, and then maybe they don't work out right away, or I know it's like so problematic. Like in our culture, we always say like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up, which is and it's directed at as like what job do you want when you grow up, and that's like that can't be your whole identity.
Yeah.
It's just setting you up for trouble later.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And with that, I
Perfect.
segue to exercise. So I'm just gonna say, we all of us were animators, right? We sit down and animate for 8+ hours a day. And one thing I am very passionate about is, and probably, I just feel like we need to take care of our bodies, and the studios will never help us do that because they're not responsible for that. So we need to take it upon ourselves to exercise, not only because our physical health is very important, and but also because I personally think that physical health is very tied to mental health. So, as I'm sure you guys have experienced too, but like if you're sitting all day, 8+ hours on the computer and you're not moving, you feel like shit if you haven't moved your body or sweat or, so I think we put down exercise because it's just like so crucial for specifically our industry.
Agree. Yeah. There's so many benefits. Like I genuinely feel like I problem solve better sometimes when I'm moving. I don't know what it is, but sometimes if I get up and go for a walk or go for a run, I just think of something to help with something I'm struggling with or a problem. Actually, scientifically, I was just listening to something about sleep, like a
listeners.
Katie
podcast. Just kind of jauntily back and
forth. I'm doing like little cocky moves, like listening to science. But there's something about I'm going to butcher this after I just cockily brought it up. But if you as you expend energy throughout the day, which is ATP. It will turn into adenosine triphosphate, ADP, which is something that we need to build up to sleep better. So I think sometimes that's why crunch is hard, because you don't expend that energy and you're not working out or whatever, and you're just working all day sitting. And then I think that actually can make it harder to sleep and get proper rest, and that's a vicious cycle. Can help contribute to burnout. So it actually benefits you to be physically active because you'll sleep better, and oh gosh, there's so many benefits. But I find it just so meditative, and I'm just I think I'm a better and more pleasant person when I exercise.
And there's a lot of I'll bring up I'm sitting in a room with a marathon runner and a CrossFitter.
God, we're going to go there.
OMG. Hunks
Ben works
left
out
and
a lot
right.
too.
Yeah, look at Ben.
But I will say there's a lot of working out doesn't have to mean the usual I'm going to go to the gym with a weight belt around my waist.
Oh yeah,
blah, blah, blah. It can be so the benefits of just
walking,
physical activity of any kind. Whether it's gardening or cleaning out your bird's cage or whatever. Or
I love that example. That's a big bird scout.
Yeah. If you're keeping blue macaws. Just something. They say 45 minutes to an hour a day of moderate activity, frankly. It doesn't have to be quote unquote working out. Try to get that in. It really, really, really is helpful.
I love that you mentioned that, because I feel like I was someone for a long time that was okay, I'm going to go to a big box gym and, lift weights and look up a program online. And in my isolation, at one point, I think during the pandemic, I was I'm just going to work out with a pull-up bar in my apartment and in isolation, just do that. And for me, it was so excruciating. I did it, but it was excruciating. And joining, I do CrossFit, which I know is kind of cringy. And a lot of people have opinions. There are a lot of problems with CrossFit, I will say. However,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's totally fine. But the point is group classes, or there's so many different ways of doing it. And I wish I kind of told myself back then, you don't have to just do 100 pull-ups a day and do things in isolation. It's good to kind of get outside your comfort zone and joining a running group Katie. Do what you enjoy.
It could be dancing. It could
be
oh man, now I'm skateboarding.
What is there to
cleaning your bird's cage?
Cleaning the bird cage. No, there's like Orange Theory is another thing. I don't know if you guys have heard of that.
Different things.
There's a lot.
Find something you enjoy to just move.
Yeah.
Just try it. Like martial arts is cool too. There's like so many. Yeah, I'm biased towards like group classes, I think, because it's like what's nice about them is you just like go and you don't have to think about it, and they just like tell you what to do, and you just have something to do.
Yeah,
sure, yeah, and
totally.
I'll try not to talk for like 5 hours about running, but I will say with training for a race or something, 90% of my running is like quote unquote easy running, where I am running at a jogging pace where I can breathe through my nose and talk. Like I am not like sprinting for every single run. There's like a plan where like you have 2 hard runs a week and then like 4 easy ones. So I will say that. That's all I'll say. But Ben's looking at me because he knows I can talk about this for like
No, I'm just listening.
If anybody wants to talk about running, I will talk with you anytime.
I will say, I do think like exercising, progressive overload, running and stuff, it is a really good like analogy for animation in general, or like anything. So yeah, but I won't get into it. But there's this whole like
animating is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, totally.
It's a steady, consistent training rather than like sprints here and there. Yeah.
I remember my therapist at one point was like, he asked me like these like few questions, and it was like, 1, did you drink enough water this week? Did you exercise this week? And then did you like have time to meditate this week? Those are like the 3 things. And it was like, he was like 90% of your issues could be solved by like doing those 3 things consistently. I know that's not necessarily true, but it just makes me think like so many even like I think so many like mental issues can be solved if you kind of do those basic things and like like move your body and you
brought up meditation. Do you want to transition to that?
Should we? Are you guys okay with going out of order?
Jumping around.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool,
I guess it's organic. I like meditation. To be honest, I'm not 100% disciplined with it like all the time, but I have benefited a lot from it. There's like a ton of apps. There's like Headspace, Calm, and stuff like that. And I really try to do daily meditations, but sometimes I'm not fully good with it. But it just helps you kind of like be curious about your mental patterns and kind of like stop and take a beat, see how you're feeling, see where you're at. So definitely something to pursue. I'm curious how do you guys meditate, or have you benefited from meditation?
I've used Headspace before. I'm not regular with it. And there have been kind of periods where I've used it more or less, and I do find money. Wow. I don't even know where that came from, because I do find running very meditative.
Oh yeah.
Money.
Money would be nice too, though.
Wow. Okay. But I do use Headspace. And I'm not like, I wouldn't say I'm super religious about it, but when I do it, I'm always glad that I did it. I never regret doing it, for sure. And it's a nice moment to take a beat. And I think it helps too with like practicing before something nerve-wracking. Especially like if you're gonna do dailies or something. I think I've learned to like do certain breathing techniques and slow down. I recommend it.
Yeah, I agree. I have to say I'm probably not the best with it, but I do take at least, I will say, pretty much every night, I take a brief like mindfulness break before actually getting into bed. Sometimes it's frankly like 30 seconds, but but it is really helpful to even that. I mean, that's so short and it's like nothing of my day, but I do here and there. And then when I really feel like, feeling stressed or depressed or whatever, I try to up it a little bit, but super helpful.
Super useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Cool. Should we jump back to what we talked about before, or what we were going to talk about before on our list of bullet points here? Setting boundaries is a good way to deal with burnout. But what does that mean?
Tell us, baby.
Oh, me? Yeah, it's because I wrote like 3 slides about this in my talk. But
that was a big.
Yeah, there's big and small boundaries you can set. So small ones would be like, if you have a job and you use Slack or email or whatever, like try to separate yourself from that when you're off hours. So like don't check Slack when you're finishing the workday, and don't like check your email on the weekend, that kind of thing. If you go on vacation, like I delete those apps from my phone, or I like to take my work email off of my app, and you set the do not disturb times. There are little things you can do to kind of maintain separation. Like at the end of the day, this is something I recently instituted. I turn my computer off as like a little ritual. Actually, this is just at home. I don't do it at work because they like use it to render. But anyway, so I turn my home computer off as like the signal of like, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to restart it. And I've heard other people will like put a blanket over their computer, or maybe they meditate or go for a walk, but some kind of like little like boundary between your work life and your home life. You guys have any ideas? I'm blanking now.
Are there boundaries?
Yeah.
I'll say, this is one right off the top of my head. It can be a little contentious, so I want to talk about it like sensitively, but with like overtime and stuff.
Right, yeah.
For example, at Disney, we're pretty privileged in that they will generally send out a survey and ask like, how much overtime are you willing to do or not willing to do? So we have a little bit of autonomy there. Sometimes you can feel pressured to do a little more, whatever, but generally it's pretty good. I know at other companies, you might not be afforded the same sort of autonomy or flexibility.
Yeah.
But for example, like even if you're freelancing, and a lot of times they'll ask for like a daily rate. And I would really encourage people to say like, well, my daily rate is, we'll say $500, and that covers 10 hours. And if I have to stay more than 10 hours, then it's going to be X, Y, and Z more. Or you can just say, I don't do more than 10 hours of work in a day. And it's non-negotiable. And that sounds really intense. And again, I want to talk about privilege and everything. And I know if you're just like looking for a job right out of school, there's a lot of pressure to like, just be like, I'll do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But really try to think about it as the long game, that, you want to do this job. If you're 22, you want to still be able to do it when you're 52.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to be able to if you're just killing yourself the whole time. So I think that's another big one. And it is okay. And also I'll acknowledge I'm a little hypocritical here because I feel a lot of like pressure sometimes to work more and whatever, but it is okay to set those boundaries and be like, no, I feel like I am most productive. I'm the biggest asset to the team if I do 9 hours a day or 10 or 8 or whatever, or something crazy is going on in my life right now. And I can only give, 30 hours this week or whatever. The reality is it might not work for every company out there, but I encourage you to try to set those boundaries and find jobs that will kind of like work with you within those boundaries, because there are good jobs out there. You don't have to take all the abuse in the world forever. So yeah, that's all a big messy way to say really try to set that boundary, I think, with like your daily work expenditure.
I totally second everything you guys are saying, and I feel like I could talk about setting boundaries for so long too, because I feel like as a chronic people pleaser, I have a lot of trouble setting boundaries. And one thing that I wrote down here is, and this is also potentially controversial, but I've had a lot of people that I really respect in animation ask me to help them with like personal projects, for instance. I've I kind of have a blanket, like, I'm not helping people with things.
That's a really good one.
Now, which it sucks. Like there's so many people that have like, there's so many people that have approached me. I'm realizing that how that doesn't sound good. Sorry, I'm a little tipsy. But no, like I kind of have a blanket, like I don't help with personal projects or just in general now, or even freelance or stuff like that, because between work, like Disney work and my own personal projects, and then like my friendships, my relationships, I just have no time to tell people the other things. And it's really hard to say no to them. But I do that because if I don't do that, I'll do it and then I will be resentful. And that's not helpful to those people. So I feel like so many of my mental health struggles relate to not setting boundaries. And it could be that type of thing. Could also be, this is where I'm getting a little crazy, but like I just got a dog, and you learn about boundaries with dogs because, you know, like people coming over and saying how to interact with the dog, you know, because we're training our dog, or like you can't say hi to our dog, or like, you know, when we're on our walk, or like you can't have your, so it kind of relates to that stuff. But that gets a little dicey.
Totally.
Totally. It's huge.
That's totally a great example though, where it's like, you know, it's your dog. You choose how to, like, you know, you get to call the shots there. And but likewise with your life, you get to call the shots generally, you know, and there's a way to do it respectfully and kindly, but being respectful and kind doesn't mean doing what other people want all the time necessarily.
I'm so glad you brought up.
That's great.
I'm so glad you brought up the personal projects and people pleasing, because I'll bring up a book now. One of my favorite books is this book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. And the whole premise of the book is basically like, life is short, so you just simply cannot do everything that you want to do. And there's not time for everything.
Totally.
So you have to prioritize the things you actually care about. And you like should recognize when you're spending time on things that are less important than your priorities, or like, and I feel bad because now I'm saying people's personal projects are less important, but it's sort of they are. It's like your life. It's a self-preservation thing too. Where you don't want to burn out so that you're being mediocre at everything. Like instead you pick and choose a few things to really put your time and energy into, so that you're not half-assing a million things. So I totally relate to that. And I feel like that has been like the lesson of like going from 20s to 30s is like really like picking and being selective about your time.
Totally.
And figuring out like what recharges you, what inspires you, what energizes you, and how to like stay sustainable. Totally.
And it can even be about setting boundaries with yourself too. I find with myself, like sometimes I like spend too much time on something. It's like, no, like it's time to take a break and you know, do this other thing that's healthier. So it's not just about being like, I'm not going to help other people, but it can be about how you interact with yourself. So
you can't be in that CrossFit gym 24/7. You're right. It's true. Those muscles need the rest. So next, we good moving on?
Yeah.
We want to talk about asking for help. This is a difficult one, especially I think when you're early on and you want to look like Superman or Superwoman or Superperson. And never want to admit that something might be too much or whatever, but I cannot advocate for this enough. Asking for help. It could be as simple as like, there's been a couple times at work at whichever studio I've been fortunate enough to be at where people have said, hey, we're thinking about you for like these shots. Do you want them? Or like, would you like to do something else? And there've been a couple times where I'm like, I really do not want this right now. But it feels so uncomfortable to be like, can I actually have this other thing right now? Like I just got done with this other thing. It was really busy or whatever. I would really like kind of a breather, but oh my God, having the I so advocate for being able to advocate for yourself and be like, hey, actually, I need a little breather right now. And it will just serve you so well in the long run, even if it temporarily feels a little uncomfortable. So that's one quick, silly little way. Do you guys have other things to talk about with that?
I feel like you said it well, and it just reminds me that I feel like some of us are chronic people pleasers, and we don't want to, upset.
Some or all of us, yeah.
Yeah, but I think people pleasing, it's tough, like because you just you sacrifice your own well-being for other people.
Shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. It can come back to haunt you. Yeah.
Totally,
yeah. We have some notes down for asking for help. Like that can manifest, and sometimes, you're coming towards the end of a project and you realize that you might not hit your deadline, and like there's very hard deadlines because you're at the end. So that could manifest with like asking to have a shot or two taken off your plate. And sometimes it could mean like asking to do less hours, like when you're in crunch. And in my experience, it's like so worth it. Like generally production teams do plan for, they have some buffer room for the ends where they like, if they're a good production team, which usually we're lucky to work with at Disney, but so basically that means they have left some space in the schedule for some animators to not have work in case other animators aren't able to finish or whatever. And that might not, that's not like at the fault of the animators. Sometimes it's just the bids are inaccurate, or a shot is I don't want to use the word nitpicked, but it takes a little more time to figure out or something. So basically like it's in your interest, it's in everyone's interest if you speak up early, and as soon as you realize, I might not hit, you can let them know, and then they will take some shots off your plate, and it's great. I've also I've been pretty specific. This is related to setting boundaries too, where I'll say like, I'm really feeling the crunch. Like I really need to do like a 45-hour week to recharge for the rest of crunch, or like I can only do 50s or 55s for the rest.
Only
hours. 50. I know.
That's just the limit.
And like, just like, then I realize, because I have more time to recharge, I'm actually doing better work too. Like this is
totally.
That's another point I wanted to make sure to bring up, is like sometimes you shouldn't feel guilty about resting, because maybe if you're overworked or you're exhausted, you're like not doing the best work too, and you like start to take shortcuts or so I think it's also in the interest of the work and the quality of the work and the company to rest. So, yeah.
Another thing we listed here was sometimes it's okay to look for a new job. If something is really toxic and you're just not generally connecting with your job, it's totally okay. Like a new job can solve that problem for you. This definitely speaks to probably a lot of people. Like I've definitely had jobs where, you're just really struggling, and then that is a simple solution, right? You just like find a new place of employment and it can be better. Yeah. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Totally. Yeah, we kind of tease this in the setting boundaries and like overtime and stuff, but I think this one is really valuable. I think especially for, if you consider yourself like a people pleaser, or you like being a high performer or something, there's a lot of pressure to be like, I have to succeed in every situation, no matter what, even if it's this like really shitty, toxic job. But like, you don't necessarily. It's okay to find a different one. And I'll also acknowledge that there's privilege involved with this. Like, of course, you got to pay the bills, and sometimes you got to stay in a bad situation for a bit. Because the job market is whatever, and any number of reasons. So we want to be sensitive to that. But I would say if you are in a place where you feel like it's just built into the fabric of the place, this kind of toxicity, and there's not much you can do. Definitely just chip away on the side with trying to look for a different situation. And I think we've brought this up in past episodes, but I want to reiterate that the niche you occupy at your current job is not necessarily the same niche that you will occupy at a different one. Or in other words, people thrive in different situations. So it's absolutely been the case that I know somebody who was at XYZ studio and they did not do particularly well there. And then they came to either Disney or DreamWorks or whatever other studio and did great there, and vice versa. People who did amazing in this system go to this other studio and they have a tougher time. So whatever, I don't know if it's appropriate to use the analogy, but I'll say whatever position you are currently occupying on the totem pole or whatever you feel like is not, take it with a grain of salt. I mean, yeah, there could be value into analyzing that and looking at it objectively, but also you might be much more appreciated at a different company or something. And I've seen it happen a bunch of times that people go to a different company and their career just takes off, and vice versa, and everything in between. So, yeah.
I love that.
Definitely.
That's a really good point.
This one's not a bullet point, but I want to bring it up because I did bring it up in my talk and I just forgot to add it to the outline. But when I was researching burnout, one of the really interesting things I found out was that one of the best solutions is actually to find more meaning in your job.
Oh, yeah.
I had always,
glad you bring this up.
Yeah, I'd always assumed that you need to take more time off or something, but there's actually studies showing you could take a year plus off and then go back to the same situation and get burnout right away because the factors haven't changed. So finding more meaning is actually an interesting solution. And that one example of this that I looked up was they were looking at this teacher who was really burnt out, and I found this through a psychologist named Adam Grant, who is actually a legit psychologist who works at Penn and stuff. So I'm not just saying they in the ether. Anyway, so there was a study and they were looking at a teacher who was really burnt out. And her solution wasn't actually to reduce her workload. It was actually to add tutoring of some really promising and dedicated students so that she felt like her work mattered. So I think it can be easy to burn out in situations where, you feel like you're not valued, your work doesn't matter, you're not contributing. And so there are a lot of ways to rethink or try to shift your situation at work so that you feel like your work matters. And in animation, I think there's a lot of ways to kind of refine value where even if you're animating something you're not super interested in, you can choose to focus on one thing that you really want to improve on. So maybe, the shot doesn't interest you, but you're well, okay, I'm really going to try to get better at eye darts and eye movement and facial connectivity. And you're okay, I'm going to dedicate this assignment to that. Or you focus on the big picture of what does the movie stand for? And, does this movie show, is it representing a group that's never been on the screen before, a minority group or a country or culture that's never really been shown in animation? There's a lot of ways to kind of find value in what you do. There's also value in connecting with your coworkers and having a better community at work. So maybe you kind of lean into mentoring somebody at work, or you lean into creating some sort of a social group at work, whether it's you plan happy hours or you form a band or you form a running group, just any way to find more meaning in your job, I think will help you yeah, I just went on a wrong rant, but do you guys have anything to add?
I love that. I feel like we have a point here that's like find the fun, and I almost think that's similar.
Can't believe you didn't say that.
What?
F the F.
F the F, sorry.
F
the F.
Like,
which granted is not actually shorter. I just like it more.
It sounds like suggestive.
Yeah, you gotta
F the
F.
Just say it to yourself. But sorry, go on, Carrot.
No, but in terms of like finding meaning in your work, like a great example of this on like a practical level for me is like if I'm cast a shot that I'm not that interested in like creatively, I might try to look for things in the process of animating that I might be interested, like that the actual process of animating might be like fun for me. So it might be, for instance, like exploring different workflows. Like if I'm typically a pose to pose animator, might be like, well, let's try to do like spline first, layered style animation, or, you know, like, oh, like what's the one thing in this shot I could really nail? I think, Ben, you early on in the podcast, I think you said something that I always like think about, and it's like,
it was F the F.
It was F the F. No, it was like have in every shot, like have a goal or something. You said something like that of like have something you're kind of, you know, trying to achieve. And basically, if you're not happy with your shot creatively that you're cast, like just, find the fun, find the meaning in it. Whether that's like your process or just make up something that you're interested in, because otherwise it's going to be a fucking drag to just
totally. Like, you know, sometimes you'll be cast a shot that has like 10 characters, and like of course like you can't spend a ton of time on like these background characters, but I'll be like, oh, you know what, that one's my college roommate, that one's my dad, like I'll just like you know, they're just like breathing cycles, but I'm gonna like try to infuse something into them just to like, you know, care about it, basically.
Totally.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Another silly little trick I like doing, or I don't know if trick is the right word, but if I'm getting like noodled with notes about like, oh, you know, tweak this eyelid here or there, whatever, I usually like to do that, and then I'll do one extra thing that's mine, where I'll like, okay, I'm going to tweak the eyelid, and even though nobody else is going to like clock this or realize the difference, like I'm going to polish this finger in this section just a tiny bit more, and that one's just for me. Like, and it kind of gives me a little more sense of autonomy, even if I feel like I'm being kind of like, you know, I have to like robotically, you know, like do these things. So I don't know. It's just a little thing that helps me sometimes. Or,
I'll say like somewhat related. Like if we're in crunch time and I know I'm like getting tired, or I will be more vocal about requesting shots and characters, because I know like that's what will fuel me, is like if I care about the shot. It doesn't always work out, but sometimes it does. And you know, I usually give a little anecdote about like why I care about the shot, where I'm like, oh, it's like a sister and a brother, and I have a brother, and blah, blah, blah. That's very, very basic. I say more than that, but yeah. But I just
a person, like, and I'm a person.
Yeah. But I like try to like just find a reason, to care.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Next, though,
I don't know where we are.
we are at maybe cut the following.
Maybe cut the. So these are like honorable mentions, I guess.
Yeah.
We don't have to elaborate on them too.
Things we had written down, but we weren't sure.
We weren't sure if we'd have time, but we do have time.
So what do we think?
So
we can briefly talk about them.
Do it.
So I feel like this one was mine. So I should talk about it. So here's my thought. The point is, understand the mind-body connection, which sounds really woo-woo, but here's the thing. I feel like, oh man, how do I even begin talking about this? I feel like there's a bigger connection between like stress, in our like mental stress, and our physical ailments that we have. Like, you know, obviously, I feel like it's socially acceptable to be like, oh, you have a migraine, and your doctor will ask you if you have, are you stressed? stressed out. And that's like normal. Or like, oh, are you not sleeping well? And that's causing the migraines or whatever. But I think that, back pain, I think there's more to like how mental health can affect your physical health. And there's books on this, and I'll put these in the show notes. There's a guy named Dr. Sarno who came up with this like kind of, illness called TMS. And I read about it because I was having a lot of lower back pain. And it talks about how certain personality types basically can be susceptible to this type of thing, where if you get stressed, you can have like back pain and migraines and stuff. And just anecdotally, I know a lot of people in the animation industry who have like wrist pain caused from drawing, or like back pain and stuff like that. And I don't know. I know it's not fully like scientifically proven, but I just have this sense that stress can do more to us than we really understand right now.
I totally agree. Yeah.
So that's where I was going with this whole
thing.
Totally.
I can speak to it too from personal experience. Like I talked about being burnout after Encanto, and there were like physical manifestations of stress for sure. Like I got like weird rashes at that time. Like I felt like my immune system was low. Definitely like was more prone to like panic attacks, and like had a couple like crying episodes or hyperventilation, so yeah, absolutely. There's a point where like stress will start to physically manifest. Back pain too. I don't know if it's more from, it could be a combo of sitting and mental stress, but I completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. This is just another random example related to this is, I know I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I love like personality tests sort of things, whatever, and a lot of them are kind of like generally bunk. Yeah. But one of the ones that is said to be a little more legit is called the Big Five, which is like the least legit name. But, it basically measures like where you are kind of on the spectrum based on like 5 different things. And it's like agreeability, introversion versus extroversion is one of them. And one of them is anxiety too. And anxiety has a little bit of a different meaning in the context of this test than what we generally talk about, but it's in the same ballpark where it's more about like noticing things and worrying about them and blah, blah, blah. And there's been a number of studies that are basically like, if you're very high in that, like there's things you can do to mitigate that and whatever, but there is a bit of a correlation between like a shorter lifespan and like much higher like anxiety, whatever. And like, I mean, it so supports that, like, I mean, the mind-body connection is very real, and I think it's so silly that we treat it as like totally separate things where like, you're totally physically healthy, even though you're completely depressed and whatever. Like, no, they're kind of
heart attacks, like a lot. I know. I shouldn't talk about this, but basically like there are people in the industry who get heart attacks, and, it's because of stress. And that's like, I feel like that's like socially acceptable to like understand that, but more subtle cases of like, oh, I have back pain or totally. Sorry. I'm just like agreeing with what you said.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. And like long-term things, like if you are stressed out chronically, like you'll have higher levels of cortisol hormone, which can lead to weight gain. Like there's so many manifestations. Yeah. And consequences.
Yeah.
Gratitude journal.
Another one that I feel like I made up, but I'm going to make one of these.
No, I have one too.
Okay. Good.
Our next bullet point is gratitude journal. And I don't know, I mean, Garrett put it down, but
my segue wasn't good enough. Just shouting out the next thing.
GG.
Yeah. Garrett wrote it down, but independently, I have had one in the past, and it is a nice practice just to like write down things you're grateful for, so you kind of take stock of everything that is going right, and you just I think, feel more at peace with the world.
Totally.
Yeah. I don't know how you have used it, but
there's this YouTube channel. It's super popular called like In a Nutshell, and I have no idea how to pronounce it. It's like there's a German.
I think you did it right. In a nutshell.
No, it's like I'm not gonna. Wow, we're gonna put it in our show notes. But
I think I know.
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like animated,
like a long German word. Yeah. Kyrgyzstan, whatever.
Yes. They all have really cool YouTube videos, and they talked about the importance of a gratitude journal. And so I think for one Christmas, I asked for like their gratitude journal, and it's nothing like super special, but it just like kind of organizes it in a way where, you know, they tell you about the importance of it, and like, you know, a little bit of a log of logging your gratitude per day. And I think, it's been cool. I'm not super consistent with it, but I think there is actual like scientific studies to say that it benefits you mentally to do it. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love that YouTube channel.
It's so cool,
man. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's great for like, I am very aware of the hedonic treadmill, which is like, basically like you adapt to any new like good thing that's happened in your life, and then you like find new things to worry about and like be upset about. So like maybe like momentarily you're really excited about a promotion, but then that like happiness about getting promoted like wears away, and you just like go back to your base norm.
The good becomes normal.
Yes,
and then
the better becomes normal.
Yeah.
Or like you upgrade from a 1-bedroom apartment to a 2-bedroom apartment, or a 2-bedroom apartment to a house, or whatever it is, and you just like kind of like go back to this baseline of like being like cranky about like not owning a mansion or whatever it is. So I try to use the gratitude journal to like combat that and remain grateful about all these new good things that have happened. And
that's really useful.
Totally.
I think the next thing we have on here is just like general book recommendations, and maybe this is better kind of set on our show notes. I know Katie had a list of really good ones.
Put them in.
And I have some that have helped me. So we'll just put that in our show notes. There's so much like knowledge out there. There's like, I have like YouTubers that are like mental health YouTubers that I like listen to. So there's just so much. There's so much.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I think there's a lot of power in self-educating and just like diving into this stuff yourself. And it sounds like we've both been self-educating a lot, Ben, too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at Ben because I'm not sure what books you've read.
Need the acronym.
You're looking at me because, you know, you and Garrett have been, and I have just been benefiting from being married to you and learning about it.
And that's perfect.
Ben's on his own journey.
Yeah, exactly. I am on my own journey.
We all have our own journey.
And I'm starting slow.
Yeah. I mean, all this to say, too, like, something I talked about when I gave the talk at Disney is like, there's not necessarily a happily ever after with this stuff where you like figure it out and then you don't have to think about it ever again. Like for me, it's an ongoing practice. I am constantly evolving. Life is always throwing different curveballs that you need to like learn to navigate in new ways. So, sorry to say, like you don't just figure it out and then you're done. It is like very much a practice. And
totally, just like exercising.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's not, you know, at no point have you exercised enough for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You know, it's an ongoing thing. So make friends with it. Right?
Yeah. I don't think we figured out a tip jar.
Wait. No, let's keep going.
Does anybody have anything on the fly?
Oh, man. A random tip.
Oh, snap. Does it need to be mental health related?
I'll say a quick one. It's not mental health related.
Do we usually ting, ting, ting?
Wait, mine's not mental health related. Is that okay? Okay.
We'll just go with it. We'll ting.
Here we go.
Ting, 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 ting. Woo, tip jar. Tip jar. All right. Might have to cut this. Remind me, guys, if we've said this before. But my tip is shooting reference for things that you would not normally think to shoot reference for, or
Oh, yeah.
Or something that's not a one-to-one translation. I'll say it that way. So I'll say if you, for example, have like a fish swimming through the water in your shot, and we do it all the time when we're like critiquing each other and giving each other notes where we're like, oh, the fish is kind of coming in here like, voom, 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 voom. And I think it should be more like, voom, voom, voom. And you talk through like timing and stuff like that.
And Ben's doing a lot of miming with his hand.
Yeah, where you'll do like a fast action with your hand. And I am a big advocate for just shoot a silly video of yourself going like whoop, 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 whoop with your hand and whatever, just going across the screen or moving it back and forth or whatever. And then even though it doesn't look like what your final animation is going to be, what I love about it is if you bring that, put it on an image plane in Maya or whatever, you can literally see your timing there, or you're like, oh, when I waved my hand over this way, it was like 12 frames, and then 6 frames over here, and then I took a really long time. It took like 63 frames to go over here, and it's this nice, really concrete way to get timing in kind of a weird way, but I really love it. Just anecdotally, I used it once on How to Train Your Dragon shot of one of the big like death gripper things. They had like scorpion tails, and I didn't know exactly how to do it. And I was having trouble like in the software having it like kind of overlap, but then also strike. But I could just kind of like do it with my hand, like the feeling I wanted. So finally I went into the reference room and just kind of did it with my hand.
That's amazing.
And then I could copy that timing, and it was super helpful.
Yeah, I've done a version of that where I had a shot in Wish where Star was like zipping around in the trees, and I actually screen captured my mouse moving around.
Oh,
so perfect. I had like the background open, but then I like did the like zip, zip, zip with my mouse and captured that path roughly, and that was really helpful to like just like capture the path I wanted and the timing. So
that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. I
totally agree.
It's similar to Procreate Dreams actually has like a record function that's similar to that now, where it can record you in real time, like doing a movement with your hand, and it gets timing in there.
New tip is download Procreate.
I was gonna say, did you guys have play with it? Because I saw it at Lightbox and it was insane.
I downloaded it and I've watched some how-to videos, but haven't actually like done anything yet.
Yeah, it's like $20.
Like, incredible.
It's $20 one time, right?
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. I don't know how Procreate. It's like my favorite company on the face of the earth because the fact that, wait, what is it just called? Procreate.
Yeah,
right?
Procreate Dreams, yeah.
Procreate. Okay, yeah.
It's not Adobe, right? It's like a just...
No, it's not Adobe. Yeah. That their apps are so good and so cost effective, and they're constantly updating them. It's just like unbelievable. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, because I know like, Rough Animator is what I use a lot for like fun, silly stuff. I'm very curious to try Procreate Dreams.
Cool. Rough Animator is awesome too.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
Because it's also like a one-time fee. It's not like the subscription model.
Yeah.
And my friend at NYU made Rough Animator.
Hey-o.
Shout out, Jacob Kafka.
Hey.
But no, I love your tip. I feel like I struggle so much with timing, and like normally in my head, I think I'm like, whatever I end up doing is always like very regular, like textured and
same.
Yeah. So like having like, oh no, when I do it with my hand, like I can see that, oh, this is 12 frames, this is 2 frames, this is that's like
totally
immensely helpful for me. So it's a great tip.
Hey.
So that about, I guess we want to talk about social media.
Yeah, I
have social media.
To be the person that did this.
Oh, do it.
Every time I'm like, what's our Instagram handle? And I always forget. But yeah, we are on social media. We're mostly active on Instagram. Yeah. And is it Animation Happy Hour? Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
We're on the ground.
You'll find us.
And
if you type in Animation Happy Hour, I'm sure we'll come up.
We have a Gmail, animationhappyhour@gmail.com. We have a website, animationhappyhour.com. we love when you leave us a review.
We got a really nice
message. Super nice email recently from, I think, Stephanie Shaw. So shout out to Stephanie. We loved it.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And it helped motivate us to re-record or get back to recording.
And just confirm, it is Animation Happy Hour, not like Animation Happy Hour or anything like that.
Yeah, on Instagram. Yeah. And we did reactivate our tip jar.
Oh, yes. We talked about it in the last one? I think
we did. Okay. Yes. So we do appreciate that if you donate to the podcast to help us with our hosting fees and whatnot. Technically, we could still sell t-shirts.
It's available, right?
Yeah, the shop's still up. Yeah. Guys, I'm so rusty. What's the company?
Oh my god!
All of this is on the website.
Yeah. Look at that.
So if you want a t-shirt or a sweatshirt or a mug with our logo, you can find it on the website.
It's great.
That's our rundown, I think.
Love it.
I think that does it. Thank you, Katie. That's perfect.
That was awesome. So this has been Garrett,
Katie,
and Ben. Thanks for listening, and happy